Hi, my name's Scott Penner, and welcome to my assignment in GCAP 648, Counseling Children and Adolescents from a Developmental Perspective. This is Assignment 1, Culture, History, Self-Care, and Working with Young People. I decided to do this assignment through a oral video presentation. Um, I wanted to be able to share in a lighthearted, kind of youthful way some of my past. Um, I've always, I do it in a somewhat of a youthful way. I have a couple different segments, and I'll use emojis and I'll mock up some of the pictures that I have, family pictures from my childhood, in order to tell the story and be transparent, self-disclosing even about myself. I've always really admired some of the psychologists like Carl Rogers or even Bowen Family Therapy that use their own personal examples through reflection in their counseling. And I wanted to do it through a video means in order to move myself more and more to that sort of warm, comfortable, chatting about this content rather than just writing about it form. And so this assignment takes place over three different components. All of it will be through video. And the first one is family and cultural positioning, and I'll explain that in our first segment, the next one. Then developmental history, and then I'll do personal reflection throughout. And application to practice throughout. So that'll be the second segment, developmental history. And then lastly, I'll do the action plan, and it'll be done through a medicine wheel and an encouragement. It's kind of like an icon that I've created in order to explain my vulnerabilities, indicators of when I'll need change or help, and then self-care plan to prevent burnout and cope with dealing with and working with childhood and adolescence. I hope you enjoy the presentation. Thank you very much. And I'll start it off. Meet my family. This is one of my personal all-time faves of my family picture. I am about 3 years old. My next oldest sister is 8, and then my oldest sister is 10, and then my parents as well. And for this component, I'll be discussing my cultural family positioning through an overlay of the different components of culture. So I'll be discussing about ethnicity, spirituality, and so on. In this activity, I'll be overlaying different components and discussing specifically privilege, intersectionality, other components that make up my family cultural identity. The first cultural component that I'll talk about is ethnicity. And as you can see, my family is white, very white. We come from a German heritage. But before I get into that, I just want to talk a bit about white privilege. I recognize that as a child, my dad worked, my mom worked. We were employed, we owned land. Um, we benefited from a classically racist capitalistic society. We had value within the economy and within Canada. And as such, we had a lot of privileges. I want to take an example. My wife, who's First Nations, her grandma was one of 18. My grandma was one of 18 as well, both matriarchal, so mom's sides. So of those 18 in my wife's First Nations family, only or 15 of which died before 80. Tuberculosis, 3 children died before the age of 5 from complications, some violence, some alcoholism, some suicide, a lot of death throughout the family, and a lot of subsequent trauma. Um, my family, my mom's mom, was one of 18, and only 3 died before the age of 80, and many of which are still living. And that trickles down to some of the privileges that we have in this land. I had a lot of cousins. I felt very safe. My wife has this story where when she would go into a store, her mom would say, "Keep your hands out of your pockets. People may look for you."
to steal things, that you might be stealing things. I never had to worry about that. I had a lot of privilege growing up, by default of being white. And I will talk a little bit about my German heritage. My ancestors moved out of Germany 400 years ago, and we were part of a religiously persecuted subgroup called Mennonite. Spiritually, so my family comes from a Mennonite background, so that's a Christian subgroup. So Protestant, Christian, fairly still dominant kind of privileged discourse. But the subgroup of Mennonite, my family would have moved historically, my ancestors would have moved for about 400 years, fleeing religious persecution in Europe. They didn't, they were pacifists and they didn't believe in baptism by birth. There was a separation of spirituality and statehood. They believed you're only a Christian if you decide to be later in life. And so, because of that, they were persecuted and pushed out because they wouldn't hold certifications of being German or Friesland or these other baptismal certificates. They resisted that. And so, by default of that, there was some sectarian kind of pieces within my culture that I recognized. But we looked very similar. We drove a car, had a house. I mean, my parents were fairly conservative, and so there were things that I wasn't allowed to do that would have been normal, normal by the Canadian standard. Um, but there are some things as well. So, anyway, regarding Christianity, one of the meta narratives that held over me during this time is I was told very young that humans are fallen, humanity is sinful and bad, and that we need to get back to having a right relationship with our Creator, with God, with creation, right relationships with each other. Um, and I, to put a little image to it, so as a kid, probably a little older than this, I would have been praying often, asking God for forgiveness, asking to be made right, and welcoming God back into my heart again and again every time. Oh, I hit my sister today and such and such. And so that's one of the meta narratives of fallenness, of kind of I come from a broken place, and it leads to some negative attributes like being highly self-critical and evaluatory, but then also some positive attributes in as far as there's a humility of taking a step back and recognizing that I do not know all, and there's hopefully something better and more informed than myself. Also, a hunger for justice, that there is rightness out there and that we need to work intentionally towards that as well. Class is the next piece that I'll talk about. And class is a little hard for me to talk about because, I mean, if you looked at this picture, you would probably reckon that we were middle class. Um, and for most of my life, I believe that I was middle class, but now I'm learning a little more about working class proper was probably more. My dad was an immigrant from Paraguay, came here very poor. Um, my my dad ended up working for a cabinet company doing sales. Um, my mom was a nurse but never worked full time. She was just part time. But she also recognizes that when she started nursing, she was paid the same as a grocer. So it wasn't as though my parents had a large disposable income. And I'm going to talk about intersectionality not in a way of oppression as much, but our Mennonite kind of humble, don't be showy, stick to like doing things really subtly and humbly, kind of overlapped with class in that there were times where we had things quite well, things were set up really kind of nicely, but we never had new vehicles or went on big vacations. We went once on one big vacation. Um, always older cars. I was always at thrift stores. I never really got new clothes. That wasn't a part of our culture, and so I would consider us to be more working class proper. Consistent jobs, had some savings, but very humble, kind of meager, um, frugal living. An example of that is I think when I was 5 years old, I was in a class and we had a movie day, and everyone could bring a drink to school, and everybody in my class brought pop, like just a canned pop, which is nowadays is not a big deal, but our house, like we would never buy canned pop. It was, I don't know, it was just frivolous considered in my house. Like too expensive, and why would you do that if it's not even good for you? Um so anyway, that's a little bit of the intersectionality, how um the humility within my spirituality kind of overlapped with class. When it comes to ability, our family didn't put a high importance on it, but we all fairly were physically fairly able bodied. I would say for myself, I did have ADHD, or do have some traits. I might have fit a diagnosis of dyslexia at some point. I really struggled at reading in my younger years. Um, and the intersection of poor working class school, combined with nobody looking for a diagnosis or focusing that much on ability, um, led to me flying under the radar, and my mom spending a lot of time to help catch me up and get me to a comparable level of reading. And I just remember as a kid being young and having a teacher sit down with me and say, I'm going to have to get used to spending an hour, I think I was in grade 3 or 4, at least an hour of homework every day, for my school years. I was really disheartened by that, but it led to some good qualities. So, anyway, that's a little bit about ability. Relating to sexuality, everyone in my household was heterosexual, and looking back, honestly, a little grateful of that. In that we were raised fairly conservative Christian, which at the time, at least, uh, it was homosexuality was not something that was embraced. LGBTQ plus was not something that was even considered. And so, anyway, also within the narrative in our household, sexuality was quite repressed, which trickled down into me in my adolescence, and later into the intimacy years of my adolescence. I didn't engage in romantic relations until much later in my life. Gender was something that, growing up, was fairly traditional. Again, fairly traditional gender roles. My mom did pride herself on working outside of the home, and being able to provide was important for her. And my dad did, I don't, under the auspice um, of Christianity or prayer. My dad could be quite sensitive, so he wasn't a cold, stoic kind of male, strong-headed kind of figure. Was quite humble, and able to talk emotionally, again, under the auspice of prayer or sensitivity or emotional or stress. We could talk about those things. And I remember as a kid, my dad being quite sensitive with me. Um, Again, motivated by kind of that spiritual kind of aspect. In order to include all the categories of culture outlined within our culture class, I'm going to include indigeneity. We were not indigenous, not to this land, not even the slightest way. Um, we had very limited interactions with indigenous people, and um, I just I'm going to take this opportunity to talk again about my white privilege. My people, when they moved here in 1885, were allocated land that was given to an indigenous group, sold twice, sold to the indigenous group and then to us. Um, and the government needed to figure that out. But that trickles into my farming ancestors cultivating the land, owning land, my parents owning a house, and to me, house ownership as well. So, anyway, that's a piece of the privilege that I have through my white identity. There's a lot I can say about age. One of the meta narratives in our household was more towards children need to be seen but not heard. I know my parents would say that that was fairly casual, but we were more of a high discipline, low nurture household. Um, we had tasks and expectations around the household. My parents were fairly casual. They didn't put a lot of pressure on us, but as we aged, there was not especially high nurturing. There was not a lot of physical hugs. Saying I love you was not something that was common in our household at all. Um, and so with age, there was not as much of that. Love was shown more through action and deed, and being there and working and doing tasks together, less so in a emotionally intent, direct way.
Right. So for this next portion, I'm going to be talking about my developmental history, and then I'm also going to be giving a personal reflection at the end of each segment. So to start out with, I'll be going through my developmental history through the developmental theory of Erik Erikson, psychosocial. Um, I'll be doing each category with its own screen. So this is just the introductory page. But I'll have a screen for each 0 to 1, 0 to 2, shame, doubt, and versus autonomy, guilt versus initiative, and carrying on. These are stats that'll change throughout. So um, on the one side here, this is just as an example. So to the negative, so areas that I might have struggled and need more development. And here, I'll give you just a little characterization of Erickson's psychosocial development. So stages completed informs therapeutic intervention. So myself right here today, that's a couple years ago, in informs, like where I'm at now, informs which specific developmental period I might have not gotten enough affirmation to kind of carry on to the next stage. It'll become clear as I give examples as I go through. But for example, trust, mistrust. I had a very my 0 to 1. I had a very strong attachment with my mom. Had a lot of trust in her, and I have strong attachments later in life now. And so that infirms that. So I would be higher on that. I gave myself a 9 on there. And then I'll go through each of these periods as we keep going, and I'll describe. They will change, so these are not set in stone right now. But as I do them, it will inform. Um, Furthermore, I'll be using a behavioralist lens, and so I'll be setting the next categories dependent on each of these specific developmental periods. But then I'll be also talking in a behavioralistic, so Skinner style of behavioralism, how each of these conditioned emotional responses were based on the environmental experience. So, an example being potentially a lower amount. So, 5 to 13, I mentioned earlier how I had difficulty with reading in my younger years. Um, and that informs maybe a negative sliding of that. So environmental situation. So a feeling of the conditioned emotional response would be a feeling of inadequacy, or that I'm not smart, or an internalized thought of I can't do this, based on the environmental experience. At school, I really struggled. So the environmental experience being school, learning disability, or learning struggles as well. So there's that. So I'll be, and I will, there's two for this. I'll add as many as I need to describe each category. So I'm not limited to just two, but I'll deviate in there as well. And I'll describe that a little more as we're going. Then lastly here, category that I'll show. So as far as application to practice. So thinking about myself as a counselor who will be working with children and youth, um, I want to have a good understanding of what will inform where I will work. And so I followed the curriculum by describing issues. So, issues that I might have a problem or a passion working with, clients that I might have an aversion to or an affinity to. And this little toggle here will toggle one way or the other. And then emotion, an uncomfortable emotion working with an age or situation, and more of a comfortable, because we can have a high passion and have a low comfort, or we could have like high affinity for something and have issues specific to the client situation, but issues within that might be low. So I wanted to gauge each of these individually, so that it can give a picture, not just a blanket statement of, oh, I like working with this group because of this. So each of these will carry on. And yeah, I'll be carrying on. So I'll start with my next developmental level, which is 0 to 1, mistrust to trust. All right, for this next category, I'll be talking about the first stage, 0 to 1, mistrust versus trust. And as you can see, I scaled my experience. I mean, I don't remember it, but from what I'm told and what I've gathered, I had it at a 9 for trust, mistrust. Mostly because my early childhood was fairly healthy. I had a strong attachment with my mom. Um, as you can see, the behavioralist view of it. So my attachment was quite strong. And so now, later in life, I have more fairly firm, trusting relationships. So I had that as well on there. And then physically, I did have, when I was born, umbilical cord was wrapped around my neck. And I didn't need to be resuscitated, but I was turning blue, and there was some things like that. So there was a little bit of something that happened in that era. Other than that, I was completely healthy for a baby. I needed no follow ups as far as anything. And so physically health, I think that can translate to my basic functioning in my body and where I'm at. Is I have no body based anxiety or physical health concerns or worry about that as well. So I think that can also be translated to that. Also, so lastly, here, application to practice. I just want to highlight a little bit within application to practice. Um, so for issues, I recognize that I first need to recognize I am a man, and as such, this age is not especially both socialized to being exceptionally um, important, but then also just physically, biologically, I was very involved in both my children's life, but I was not breastfeeding, obviously, and I wasn't as terribly involved. So I have 3 children. I was very involved in 0 to 1, but my role was not especially there. So as far as issues with health and my involvement, application to practice, I mean, somewhat of a problem. I would just say, gender wise, I am not predisposed to being especially affectionate or able to fit within that. And then within clients, like working specifically with kids, again, I can hold a kid. I love kids. I love cuddling them. I love working with them. But I recognize that I might not be the most. So that's both of these have coding on lower ends. As far as emotion, comfort, and uncomfort, I am fairly comfortable with babies. I don't mind picking them up, um, coddling, talk to them. But again, I'm recognizing under the guise of this is the passion for a lot of people, a lot of moms or females, and I just want to also recognize that might not necessarily be my place. Also, I recognize 2 biases within that. So I recognize that my life was, well, one being the bias of being a man and not knowing the inner workings of early year mothering as well, and then also another bias. I had a strong attachment. My physical health was fairly consistent, and so I might not recognize or see or sympathize as well as others who may have rift attachment from early childhood that were adopted out right away or had a conflictual relationship or mother was going through postpartum. I might not understand or sympathize, or that might just not be on my radar as much as some others. So, anyway, that's a little bit about my 0 to 1. And this is myself right here. So, now looking at ages 1 to 2, this is me. I was 1.5. Um, Considering Erickson's psychosocial development again, within this category, shame and doubt versus autonomy, I put myself at a 6 here. Again, don't have a ton of memories from 2 years old, but from what I gather and what I've told, I had a pretty strong and healthy child development during these years. When I think about the behavioral considerations, like during this time period, um, I had two parents. All my parents are still married, um, and I think my attachment to my parents, both caregivers, during this time, my mom was still stay at home. She wasn't working outside of the home. But this period was characterized in general through a lot of autonomy. I can think of my mom saying when she'd bring me to kids' programs, I was always the first to want to try the activities. I felt safe in my neighborhood, in my environment. Um, Both parents are very involved, and I had a strong connection with them, a strong relationship, and my world. So here within safety, my world was fairly safe, which kind of leads to now. Later in life, I was very open to travel, new experiences. I like getting out in the world and exploring it. Teenager, I hitchhiked at times, things like that. So, regardless, during this time, my world was fairly safe, and I had a good understanding of my role and confidence to explore it as I was exploring my world. Within that, for application to practice issue, I would say I'm more passionate, maybe not about this age as much as passionate about young parents. I really do love the endeavor of parenting, and I really do want to help people within that category. So I would consider medium to high. Again, working as this age for clients, I recognize also there's a lot of nurturing. A lot of female therapists out there are just naturally so good at it. I see it very easily, and I that might not be as natural towards that. So I'm kind of a middle of the bar for that, but I do like working with parents as well. And then also within the last category, a medium to high for emotion. And I just want to recognize one bias within this age category. Um, Recognizing that in the development of autonomy and exploring your world and being safe, I recognize in myself, I grew up with two parents, and um, I don't especially work well with divorce. And so, working with a child through divorcing parents, I know I wouldn't, through this class, be learning about divorce and couples counseling. That's not this class, but that is a bias that I have, that I really see it affecting children, and I have a little bit of a hard time. I know when friends of mine have divorced, it's tough for me, and so that's a little bit of a bias that I want to be aware of as well. All right, next stage, I'm going to be looking at myself from ages 3 to 5. This is me at age 3. And for myself, I put myself in this at a more on towards the guilt side. And a part of the reason is I currently, like, I do have a high sense of guilt just in my everyday. Um, I was fairly I would lean to being really initiative taking, and I am very ambitious. I take on quite a bit, but that's often motivated by guilt. And both close friends and family members, and even my current counselor, recognizes I do have a high sense of critical voice, difficulty letting things go, hard for me to understand that I can make mistakes, and that's a little bit of this era here, recognizing and having a high good sense of self responsibility and awareness, which leads to behaviorally some of my guilt complex. I recognize that my religious upbringing, and then also my own personal high expectations, contribute to that as well. Um, but I do have an exaggerated or high sense of locus of control. I often ascribe inappropriate self blame to myself, taking on too much. And I can see that in my childhood too. I can see belief where I would pray for things and believe that, well, why didn't it happen? I must have not been praying. I must have taken things on a little too hard and too fast for myself. And then another one socially. So this is an age bracket where siblings start to play more of a part. And I only had sisters growing up. Still only have sisters. And then that kind of contributed to me being socialized to being more comfortable, maybe with more emotional and sensitive focuses. And I kind of crave those kind of atmospheres, which I think in the long run had led to me being in a more female dominated profession, social work, and then now moving into counseling as well. So that's a little bit of how the environment growing up conditioned my emotional responses. I emotionally was more comfortable in those places. Then application to practice. So issues around this age bracket, so school transition, preschool, group dynamics, interpersonal effectiveness. I would place my interest on those issues. I might have a little more problem of that era. Clientele, I mean, I love kids. I love this age bracket. It is really fun to work with this ages. So I'd put myself at around here. But then also within emotion, I am excited, but I also can recognize I can get frustrated with this age bracket as well. Um, we can explain things to all sorts of ages really well, but there's sometimes within the 3 to 5 range where you need to set the hard and fast boundaries, have the clear expectation, have a little bit more of the expectation and hierarchy, solid boundaries in order for them to walk through. And so I would say I put myself at the score that you can see here, medium to high. I enjoy it. I feel comfortable with it, but I can get caught as well. So that's a little bit of this developmental period, guilt and initiative 3 to 5. So now looking at the ages of 6 to 13, so this age bracket of inferiority versus industry, it's more characterized 6 to uh, puberty, and mine was around 13. Um, so this was a hard time for myself. So I put myself at a -5 in this category. There was a number of things. So a number of things that are really important within this age bracket are school and local environment, success in school, physical abilities. Those are all, and then social skill as well. And I would say I did quite well within social skills. I changed schools 3 times because of a number of reasons, but because of cognitive development as well. And I'll get into it a little bit here. So I struggled at school. I later in life I had the understanding that I have ADHD. I had as a childhood. I didn't know. I really struggled at sitting still, focus, inattentiveness, which led to late learning of reading, and I needed to change schools to a smaller school to get kind of extra support. My parents funded that, and then so that was really difficult for me to be behind in class and struggle at it and do a lot of extra work in order to kind of keep up or just kind of pass a lot of the grades. I did a lot of hard work, and then physically another difficulty within this time frame for learning my overall, I guess, just industry was physical abilities. I did do a lot of sports. I struggled at sports as well, though. Around just after this age, probably 9, 10, I was 8 years old here. I got a diagnosis of obesity. I was quite heavier and I struggled at the sports, and self esteem went down. Um, yeah, I had a lot of low self esteem, low self worth, a lot of body image issues as well. Um, and so this was a hard time for me. So again, those environmental experiences manifesting in emotional responses led to a difficult time that now later in life I can see, oh, there's things that were unfulfilled that I needed to work at, maybe a little more so now. So anyway, looking at application to practice, some of those struggles have manifested in me being interested in those ages. Self-esteem, physical skill, confidence, ability, those are issues I like to work with. And I could see myself doing really well encouraging kids from my learned hardship. And then also clientele, I really do enjoy that awkward preteen age of kids are still, they're not too pretentious or standoffish. They're still innocent and outgoing, but their bodies have all of a sudden adjusted quite a bit. And so I wouldn't say I'm avert. I volunteer and I'm pretty interested in this age bracket, especially the later age of like 10, 11, 12, 13. Those are fun ages for me to work with. And then emotionally, I would say emotionally, I do feel pretty connected. I like engaging this age bracket and helping them with these conditions. So these situations. So anyway, that's a little bit of my age bracket within 6 to 13. So now, lastly, the last category of age 14 to 18, confusion versus identity. I put myself at a +8, so on the identity side, having a strong sense of identity. Um, and to put context to my situation, this is age 16. Put context to it, I was moving to a place. I ended up landed going to school in a small town just outside of our town. It was a Mennonite little town, about 32 kids. And during this age of confusion and identity, peer group, in group, out group associations, leadership, those are factors that are important during this Erickson stage. And that social location of not just the location of that school, grades 7 through 12, but I landed in a what I would consider a Mennonite town. About half the kids, 32 kids in my grade, were mostly Mennonite, and so a number of things kind of vibed: religion, spirituality, even smaller stuff like wearing older clothes, thrift stores. It was a poorer town. I mean, it was working class still, but it didn't have a whole lot of uh, it would have socioeconomically it would have been a little lower, but high engagement in wellness in activity. Summer camp was an important thing, youth groups, a lot of organization and youth engagement, and more of a focus on wellness than high achieving from my previous school. Um, and that trickled into some of the behavioral aspects right here. So my cultural identity, I finally felt like my emotional response was I fit in, based on the environment that was focused on some of my these deep relationships. Now 20 years out, living out of province 10 years. Even today, I messaged with two of my friends just randomly from high school. So I have really deep relationships there that have lasted. Lifelong friends. And then as far as leadership style as well. So my parents trusted me quite a bit. So trust from parents led to more of a trust in myself and my independence that I could navigate this ship of my life. And so my parents had a pretty loose leash. I might have been grounded maybe one time. Um, and with that, my parents trusted me. I trusted myself. I became more autonomous and independent. So now, in reflection, something that I'm really considering. I have a passion and interest in working with teenagers, and a part of that might be because I had such a wonderful high school experience. I know a lot of people don't have great high school experiences. Mine was wonderful, and so often when I ask people, I hear often it was a hard time, and this was my favorite time of my childhood, adolescence, and subsequently, like probably by relation, um, it is my favorite age to work with as well. So, for overall application to practice, issues, teen um, issues of identity, autonomy, independence, learning how to navigate their own world. I really enjoy working with clients themselves, youthful hubris, the black and white kind of moral high expectation, spontaneity, volatility. I understand that it can be hard sometimes for people to stick handle some of the autonomy that teenagers have. You can't necessarily tell them what to do or have more power, legitimate power over them like a 5 year old. Um, Yet I really enjoy working with that clientele, and I think I do quite well at it. Emotionally comfortable, high energy. I'm pretty high energy as well. I get excited about the opportunity and the ages and some of the raw highs and lows of the emotion. But I also enjoy, as opposed to younger ages, this age you can abstract reason logically a little more with this group. So I really enjoy that as well. So anyway, altogether, had a great teenage high school experience. And it likely has led me to really having a passion for working. I would be very honored to work with this age bracket in the future. Hi, lastly, I'm going to be providing my action plan for how to work with children and youth. Um, I'm going to be doing this, I'm offering this up in a bit of an action icon here. So, this is something that I've done in the past. Um, every 5 years, I try to look at a little bit of a medicine wheel of balance for my life's coping skills. Some of these I do often, some of them I don't. But essentially, when these circles, when I get maybe triggered to burnout, I need to dial up some of these activities and increase them and focus on them. So I'll go through this a little bit, and I would encourage you could read this as well while I'm talking about it. Um, but I'm sharing this. This is something that I can easily come back to when I am facing burnout, and as an encouragement, a little easier than maybe reading a paper. And so this is in part for pragmatics of application in the future for my practice. But I haven't in the past done vulnerabilities to topic and then emotional responses as well. So each of these do have a specific thing. So part of the reason why I've appreciated doing the medicine wheel style of spiritual, physical, emotional, mental, is to encourage the areas which I don't practice especially strongly. So an example being spirituality and emotional wellness. When I am in crisis or feeling the heat or pressure of my workplace or life in general, I would say that I definitely uh, I'm easy to go to the physical side, maybe the mental side more so, more cut and dry behavioral activation things that I can do. I run quite regular, hike. I don't do yoga as much, but these are some of the things, wrestling with my kids. These are things I can very easily do. But to take time to journal, to take a solitary overnight hike, um, read homilies, also even in the emotional components here, talk deep with a friend. I don't do that enough. Spend time dreaming. Mindfulness exercises I practice quite regularly. But in order to balance myself, I presented some of these activities that I would be doing if I'm experiencing and getting an understanding of an emotion of a burnout, essentially. So this first outside circle is vulnerabilities by the topic and issue. So I do have the mixed blessing of having experienced burnout in the past. I've taken a leave from my social work child protection position. Oh, that's already 7 years ago. Um, and these were some of the things that I noticed. So I do have personal experience that is informing this. I would say it was most informed by vicarious trauma from infant and toddler through sex abuse. And it was one child on my caseload who was very hurt while, not while in my care, but I was the guardian during that time. Um, and so also other areas, compassion fatigue, so loss of hope, just kind of a lethargy. Um, but those are vulnerabilities, so compassion fatigue. Conflict of interest, also termination of services, aging out when children are leaving care. It is hard for me to kind of let go, and I could see that also being the case when I'm working with a child or youth. And then completed suicides or cluster suicides, those are also um, areas of vulnerability for myself. And I'll know that they're vulnerabilities. I'll know that it's getting really deep and really difficult when moving to this next layer, the emotional responses start to pop off, indicating the burnout. So dread about the future, apathy, no excitement. I am a very excitable person, and so if I'm not excited about much, then that's a good example is not being excited about the next season and the activities. I really enjoy summer, fall, all these activities connected with the seasons. Intrusive thoughts, and this would be a big one that this happened, and I had a young child. Um, and intrusive thoughts, so transfer to frequent thoughts at home. So frequent thoughts of the abuse of the child when I was around my child. That was a big indicator of that. Low energy for family, focus, highly distractible, avoidance of social settings, all big indicators for myself of burnout. And so those are examples of these are again, these are practices I want to be doing and I do on a regular basis. But these are areas that I need to increase when I'm noticing some of these things as well. Another one obviously considering the workplace, and I haven't done private practice, but increasing supervision and consultation, that's a big one that I hope to continue, to not make decision in isolation. So, giving you a little context of my historical burnout, which was around, I was working for an Indigenous organization doing child protection, um, and I do have a better understanding, and just so that I know, and this is maybe a message to myself as well, I do, if I am facing burnout, I was really surprised now in reflection, how far I would suffer. The rumination would start, which would move to anxiety, and then fatigue from those ruminating thoughts, and then a total depletion of energy and exhaustion, moving into depression and just apathy towards my job, usefulness, progress in life, the value of therapy, of social work. So that's a little bit of the trajectory that I know that it can take, and I know I've shared this with my wife. My wife is very well attuned, and I will show this icon as well to my wife, just so that she is aware of some of my triggers and habits that I need to keep up on. um, I would say, as far as like triggering situations, so in order to balance some of these vulnerabilities, I do have, and I didn't list it on here, but on the flip side, I do have significant relationships with family members and friends that have experienced childhood trauma, homelessness, suicide in close proximity in family, and that, on the flip side of that, is a really big encouragement to keep working with children who have gone through quite a bit, because I know that, especially for individuals like myself who was quite sheltered from childhood, and adolescent trauma, we can have a over association, or kind of our safety alarms might go off quite readily when we hear about the trauma that many children face. And I just want to recognize that, I have had a lot of experience with people who have faced trauma and have come through on the other side. So, as far as over associating, over emphasizing those traumatic experiences, I do have kind of a check and balance to remind myself, to and I am grateful that I have had limited experiences with suicide and with childhood abuses, but just to recognize that there is encouragement. I have a lot of examples of people who have come through on the other side. Um, and then lastly, I just want to mention, um, within those relationships, I also want to recognize that I do have a balance, a further understanding through my child protection court processes, removals, which were very slim, but I have an understanding of a childhood trauma and the far reaches of it, and the need for consultation, especially here, consultation and supervision, that you're not making decisions in isolation. And the more that you start to become, um, maybe burnt out, is the propensity for isolation. And so, um, my connection with supervision and consultation with social worker guardian, um, and then clinical supervision as well, that needs to be strong and dialed up. And I am very, both in my workplace presently, and I expect in my future that, an increase of supervision and consultation will be a part of that. So thank you very much. This is my action plan, and I thank you for the opportunity to share. Hi there. I just wanted to give a little bit of a conclusion and summary of my learnings. It's helped me understand and apply some of the conceptual frameworks and apply them to myself, synthesize, articulate, critically think about how these things might apply to myself, and then to be able to have an opportunity to communicate some of the knowledge effectively and professionally to both clients and then also to academics in this realm as well. And so family cultural positioning really helped me understand my social location, attachment trends. The developmental history and personal reflection kind of gave me an affirmation of areas of interest and areas of further work as well. And then action plan is, I see it as a little bit of a framework for how I'll be able to continue and to work well and comfortably with children and adolescents, which can be a really tough demographic to work with. So it's been a really important learning. One of the most specific ones was how we applied it specifically to myself. And then I think this is a good opportunity for me to, from my learning, to be able to talk about that learning and explore some of these potentially through self-disclosure, to maybe lift some of the heaviness and power differential with clients, to be able to talk about my own development, some of the areas of hardship, some of the areas of strength. I think especially observing how hard it actually was and sitting with how tough it was with my learning disability, my struggle with reading, how it affected much of my understanding inferiority kind of years and complex as well. And then also to be able to spend some time understanding my passion and the areas of comfort that I have, and encouraging that area of strength as well. So thank you for this opportunity. I hope that you were able to enjoy this presentation. Bye for now.